Accounting Podcast by Professor Accounting, episode 25, Control Accounts Skills Question. Hey, welcome back to you all. So, skills question, going to be over to you basically. Exams are imminent, they're coming up, so you're probably deep into revision. Here's a question for you to look at for this topic if you're interested. Put it on the screen now. It's not an exam question, which you can obviously probably tell from the what's on the screen now, but this is a skills question. So this is testing purely the skill, one particular skill, a couple of skills, as I should say, in this topic, which is absolutely relevant to the A-level examination. So, and I think these are so powerful, so useful. So I would strongly advise you to make sure you are doing exam papers for your exam board, AQA, OCR, the main two, or you've also got EdExcel as well. But certainly attempting skill-based questions are so powerful, as I've said, to really test what you've learned previously in the sessions, in lessons with teachers and so on. So here is a skill question. Most of these will be skill questions rather than doing the full exam questions. So skill question number 9, this is for reference. Okay, we've got a sales ledger control account, and what I want you to do in this question, the task is, what should the closing balance be? So the red value, I've put it in red, the balance CD 396,800 is incorrect, and the reason it's incorrect is because there's been errors. Errors have occurred in preparing the sales ledger control account. So I would like you to think about what's in the ledger, question all the information, and reproduce it in some way, and then give me the correct value for the balance CD, and therefore that'll be the balance BD starting the next period. So that value you're finding is the balance of debtors owing money to the business. That's the whole point of this. So we have, just for reference, the balance BD 308,600. That's obviously correct. It's not going to be different. That's what they started with this period with debtors value. That's the amount of debtors that owed the business. And then in this particular question, the error, it's that now saying 396,800. But you need to obviously get the right value. I've given you A, B, C, D, which is one of them is correct, one of them is the answer. So just to give you some bearing whether you've got it right or wrong. So pause the podcast now, have a go yourself, see what I'm trying to get you to do, and come back after you've finished it. I think it should take 5-10 minutes. If you're really understanding what's in there and what's relevant to what's being tested. So rather than just think of it and do it, actually assess what you've learned from the particular question. Okay, pause it now and come back. Okay, so those of you who have actually completed this, please do engage in the work and try it rather than just watch it and wait for me to do it. If obviously you're stuck with what the topic, maybe some students are watching this and you're thinking, I just haven't learned this topic. It's just a topic I've never been taught. Actually, it's not something or maybe you miss lessons for whatever reason, or whatever reason. The fact is, you may be starting this, trying to pick up a few pointers on the topic. So here is the kind of overview of this. I'm not doing a full podcast on the topic. It's more of a skill question. But the sales ledger control account is purely surrounds credit sales, but it's credit sales. So if there's any reference in there to cash sales, then we need to ignore or deal with it, as in remove them. So the sales ledger control account only involves credit sales. Obviously the purchase ledger control account would only involve credit purchases. So in this case only involves credit sales. So the reason I'm saying this, which is quite a relevant point overall, but in this question we have a reference to cash sales. Well, cash sales is a different way of collecting sales. The sales ledger control account is assessing the value for debtors. Since cash sales occur and don't produce debtors, then they're not relevant. So we need to exclude them from this control account. All control accounts, they just don't go in there. I'll mention later, if I remember, I'll mention later where it's quite useful in some way to put them in, but it's telling you something different, so don't want to confuse you. So remove them. Now, let's have a look at something else. Let's think about maybe if there's something else that should be removed. I'm sure you've all heard of contra to the PLCA, so the purchase ledger. So it's basically the opposite ledger. which makes sense. I mean, if you look back at contra, well, I've got a podcast on contra. If you want to know how to work it out, what you use, how to do it, we'll come back to contra just for a moment. Cash received from credit customers. Well, yes, it's credit customers. We're getting money from them, so it's relevant to be in there. Discounts allowed. Again, yep, it's the right discount. It's not discounts received, so that's okay. Bad debts, irrecoverable debts. Yeah, we need them because that affects debtors. Interest charged. Yes, again the same thing. We can charge debtors interest if they don't pay on time. And allowance for debtors as well. Well, that obviously does affect debtors, but that's the one I want to focus on at the moment. Allowance for debtors, you may know better, which is called provision for doubtful debts. But the word provision, we're now using international accounting standards, like we're calling debtors trade receivables and so on, creditors trade payables. Allowance means provision, debtors, for debtors, we just use that instead of doubtful debts. So the thing with allowance for doubtful debts is that it does affect debtors, but it doesn't affect the control account since it's an independent value, and it's basically the business decides and deems that value of provision, which is purely to be prudent. So we don't ever include it in the control account. So remove that as well. Now let's go a bit further into looking at this information. What we need to think about is, again, in the previous podcast I showed you on the layout, the debit side over on the left, debit side, this is because debtors are an asset, this increases, so plus there, this increases the side for debtors, and on this side, the credit side, this is obviously a negative, it decreases. So what are we increasing and decreasing? Well, the value for debtors. So interest charged on overdue account. If we charge interest on a debtor account, as in we expect debtors to pay more money than previously because we're charging them interest, what's going to happen to the debtor account? It's going to increase. So this value will need to go over to the debit side. That's an error we need to remedy as so. Anything else that needs to be moved over? Well, yes, there's one more value from looking at this. The other, obviously, we've dealt with the values that don't need to be there. Contra. Now, contra is interesting, which is offsetting. Briefly, contra, the whole point of contra is, in short, we are offsetting the lower amount of money in a case. Well, we're only given this value, so this is the contra value. We're not going to change the value. But when we make a contra, it always goes, because we're offsetting, it always goes on the side of the ledger which is reducing the ledger. So therefore, this is on the positive side. So it needs to be on the negative side. So that needs to move over. Okay, let's take stock of the values that we've got. On the debit side, that should be right. Just check the sum. On the debit side now, we have a total of 465,200. We move, just do that, we now move the total over to the credit side. And we get, again, 465,200. And then, might be misleading, delete that, we get a new value. Two ways you can add up the values in the column already and then take it away from the value of the total, or the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to do the total and then minus each individual value, obviously using Excel. And again, you saw before that the value there was misleading because it wasn't involving all the numbers. I know you don't use Excel for your obviously for exams, so it's not a problem. So the value there we get so far is 307,100. Is that a value that's possible? Yes, in the list it is. That is the correct answer, by the way. So 307,100. Obviously don't forget to bring it down to the debit side over here. So just tidy up my columns, they look a bit messy. So in this case, I mean, the errors there you had to change. Just moving things around, deleting things that don't belong there. It's purely a skill question, because in A level you would rarely get a question like that. Maybe something like that in AQA, possibly, not in OCR, but certainly it's purely skill as to recognise what you've learned from this topic. So it's always about debtors. So maybe as a second point to say there, I suppose um, ledgers what ledgers belong in the control account. So again, there, what I mean by that is, I mean, look at credit sales. Most of these is information, but credit sales, well, that will come from the sales journal or the sales daybook, the So you've got their cash received from credit customers. Well, that comes from the bank. So you're just basically asking what relevant information belongs in this account, as we've just done. So hopefully you got that. If obviously you complete the question, hopefully you got 307-100, which is answer C, and that shows you're progressing in the topic. If you didn't get that, please look at that and how I went through it. If you're still not sure, please ask. But certainly that is those are the skills you must know those skills for when you actually have to complete these from scratch, from empty ledgers to put things in. A typical exam question, which you may have seen, but they could give you the information for a sales ledger control account and a purchase ledger control account, and then they just ask you to produce the sales ledger control account. So you have to select the information that's relevant. Okay, so lastly, don't forget terms. I mean, a lot of language is changing in accounting, so we can easily get lost with the wording, but the sales ledger control account, both exam boards will still use it, but if we think of sales ledger as being relevant for debtors, knowing that International Accounting Standards, IAS, International Accounting Standards, we use the new terminology. So we've got debtors is debtors are now. We've got receivables, there's an I in there, and you've also got creditors. They are payables, which it makes perfect sense which way around, but it's just new terminology you must understand. And the reason I tell you this is because the other title you could have had for this is, I don't say capitals, but receivables ledger. So receivables ledger control account. So just be mindful of that. It's not going to be, I mean, I suppose it's like where if you're doing the trading and profit and loss account, well, that's now called the income statement. The balance sheet is the statement of financial position. Um, but they still ask for the word balance sheet. So the language is important. You do become familiar with the language at A level, and especially if you're going to go beyond A level, university, and even beyond there to do accounting, you've got to really, it's so useful to get to grips with the terminology now. Well, I want to thank you for stopping by. Hope it's been useful. Please do rate these podcasts and comment upon them. Any queries, any questions, more coming soon as well. So thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.